I mentioned before the break the terrorist attack on 3 churches and some hotels in Sri Lanka. I'll give you an update. Unfortunately, the death toll has now risen to 310, including 2 Australians, Manik Suriachi and her 10-year-old daughter. Miss Suriachi's husband had just left the church before them and looked around and saw his daughter dead. Sri Lanka's health minister has blamed a local Islamist group for supplying the suicide bombers for these attacks, but says they were backed by an international network, which he has not named. There are now reports that a Syrian man is among the 40 people arrested so far. There are also reports that this was allegedly in revenge for the Christchurch massacre at 2 mosques last month, although, as we discussed last night, the level of planning needed to carry out these very, very well-coordinated and widespread attacks suggests that this was in the works much, much earlier. Joining me is the panel, Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching and Liberal Senator James Paterson. James, it is a reminder, I mean, we heard Donald Trump and others celebrate the destruction of the Islamic State Caliphate in Syria just last month. But while that's gone, the threat remains.
You're right, Andrew. It's a depressing reminder, I think, of 2 fundamental truths about our modern age. One is that, although there are a range of terrorist threats that we face in the West, the most preeminent, the most prolific, the most sophisticated and the most deadly is the Islamist terror threat. And the second reminder is that outside the Western world, Christians are among the most persecuted minorities in the world. They were systematically targeted in this instance, as they sadly have been across the Middle East and much of the rest of the world.
Would you agree with that last point?
I think that there has been targeting of people following different faiths. I mean, remember there was also the Tree of Life, the mosque in, the shul in America, where Jewish people were killed at their place of worship. And I wonder about the denigration of the practice of faith and the lack of respect that different groups are showing for it. And of course we know in the Middle East that while Daesh has been territorially defeated, it doesn't mean that all of the adherents to it have been found and have been accounted for. Very
well-trained people as well. Can I just clarify, because I did an editorial yesterday remarking on how astonishing it was that so many leaders of the left refused to use the word Christian and say Christians were targeted. Do you think Christians were targeted?
I think, in Sri Lanka, yes. I mean, they were Christian followers, adherents to the Christian faith. They were in their place of worship. Yes, Christians were targeted in Sri Lanka.
It's just interesting that, Greens leader Richard Di Natale, for instance, and even Bill Shorten's initial statement did not mention the C word. I thought that was really strange. But I wonder, James, we've got ANZAC Day coming up Thursday. These attacks, the burning of the Notre Dame, now that was an accident, but a symbol of tradition as well as of Christianity, the general uneasiness. There are 2 things going on, aren't there? One is a literal attack on our way of being, our traditions, everything, churches. The other is whether we defend them enough. I wonder whether ANZAC Day and ceremonies like that are going to have more salience now.
One of the trends I'm enormously encouraged by, Andrew, is the way in which Australians from all walks of life and from all different backgrounds have rallied around shared symbols of identity like ANZAC Day. That's something that all Australians can be proud of, no matter who we are, how we came here, when we came here. It's something that really speaks to the Australian character and the Australian tradition in a unifying and uniting way. And it's in stark contrast to a lot of the other ways that people are identifying in the modern world, which is divisive and narrow and sets us apart from each other. So I hope that ANZAC Day and other events like it continue to grow as they have in recent years, in prominence and in acceptance and in celebration by all Australians.
It's almost like I think we need it more, even though the memory of ANZAC Day itself is obviously less.
Well, I think, though, that when you think about the spirit of ANZAC, we can see it actually in our current Defence Force, and we can see it in the men and women who serve in the Defence Force today.
Because you've been to Afghanistan.
And to Iraq. And, I was very privileged to go with the ADF on those trips. And I think that while ANZAC Day, yes, is obviously, as with the passage of time, it becomes more distant, yet the very spirit of it and the very spirit that those ANZAC soldiers fought with, we can see now in
Except
our
we don't see it, of course. We don't see it on the television.
No,
It's a relatively much smaller force. I'm just saying the need for an ANZAC Day seems to be even more pressing. And I think that fashion that we've had for the last decade of knocking ANZAC Day again, ANZACRY and all that, is going to be hard to sustain for academics of the left. Unfortunately, let's go to politics. Today, we had Bill Shorten refusing to back the Adani coal mine and even refused to rule out reviewing the environmental permits it won. We've had a Labor candidate for Flynn saying he does back the mine and signed a pledge to that effect. And we've also had the Labor candidate for Dawson, another Queensland seat, say that Labor, she goes the other way, that Labor could challenge those environmental permits. Which of these three opinions do you hold?
Well, this is my view, is that if you have legislation and obviously the subsidiary regulations that fall out of legislation, you should follow that. So we are lucky enough to live in a country with the rule of law. If there are, environmental permits and approvals, the processes that need to be undertaken in order to, have a mine, then that's what should happen. There should be, the rule of law should be followed. And that is what Bill has said.
No, I believe in the rule of law, but he didn't rule out revisiting the environmental permits.
Andrew, I follow these things, I think, fairly closely, but for the life of me, I still can't work out whether Bill Shorten wants the Adani mine to proceed or doesn't want to proceed. And frankly, whether you're in favour of the Adani mine or you're opposed to it, all Australians deserve to know what Bill's actual position is on this, because early voting is starting on Monday, the 29th of April, and there'll be people walking to the booth who either think it's a great idea or a terrible idea, who will be none the wiser as to whether they should vote for Bill Shorten or against him on the basis of that issue, because he's just not been clear.
Well, you're good friends with Bill Shorten, and you've spent time on his bus and all that. In his guts, does he want this mine or doesn't he?
I think what he wants is the process of the law to be followed.
Yeah, so do I.
So
do I. We all do. But in his heart, does he want this mine to proceed or not proceed?
Well, remember, Bill, as an AWU State Secretary and National Secretary, represented mining workers. He is very aware of the mining industry and the jobs it creates. But it is not up to... I'll give you one of the things...
Just answer for a personal opinion. I've got one, you've got one.
But can I just say something that I think Tony Burke said something that was quite wise in an insider's interview, and that is that decision makers, if they preempt the decision-making process, it can undermine the integrity of the decision.
On that point, Andrew, Tony Burke, as a future Environment Minister potentially, could be a decision maker. Bill Shorten as Prime Minister is not a decision maker. There is regulatory power vested in an Environment Minister that might make it appropriate for him to have an agnostic position. But Bill Shorten should not be agnostic on jobs for Australia.
Yeah, but everyone's being very pure here. Like, there are no biased judges, they don't let their personal opinion work, influence how they look at a project. What is his predisposition?
Of administrative law.
I've got that. I'm simply asking, not for him to break a law.
He has expressed his opinion. His opinion is that there's 25 approvals that need to be achieved.
We're not going to get an
answer.
answer.
It will be a good thing if they achieve that, or a bad thing.
There are 16, and the 16
will be
that have been
unhappy?
done. There's another 9 to go. It's not up to anyone but the decision makers, the people who write the reports for the approvals processes.
Kimberley, let me put it this way. The Adani mine is stopped. Does Bill Shorten reach for an aspirin or is it champagne?
And I think that would be up to...
You can't even answer that!
That would be up to the process. This is why
let's move on.
We have environmental...
See, this is the problem. No one has got a focus and they don't know...
But don't we all think that foreign mining companies should abide by the rule of law?
Yes,
and remember,
I'm asking you a completely different question.
There are Liberal Party MPs who actually didn't want the loan to go to Adani. Remember that? They voted against it.
I was asking a different question, but listen, let's move on because I'm not going to get the answer. This is the whole point. Bill Shorten will not tell us whether he actually likes the mine or not. He wants to keep us in suspense. I suspect he doesn't want it. Billionaire Clive Parmer. His One Nation Party collapsed, obviously, after 2013. He got a few senators and himself in Parliament. He's now back with a new party, United Australia. And a news poll today in 4 marginal seats from Townsville to Perth says he's averaging 8% of the vote, which is astonishing, if true. Not sure I believe it. 14% in the Queensland seat of Herbert. What does this tell you?
It tells you can't spend $30 million on political advertising and get no support in the community, but actually, given he spent 3 times both major parties combined, the relatively low amount of support. That's right. He's spent about $30 million. The major parties are estimated to have spent about $12 million in the last few months.
Is that true?
So
is that your figures as well?
About 3 times as much, and he's sitting on a fraction of support. So
yeah, but he shouldn't get a vote. I mean, after his record and all that. I mean, shouldn't he be reassured that money doesn't get you as much as you might have thought, or scared that it did?
I think he has. Well, he spent a lot of money. His branding is uniform. I think that helps him. I think that the preference flows, he will be, trying to negotiate, as will the government, because there's been a fracturing of the Conservative vote, I think, across these minor parties. I think that would be a real concern for the Liberal Party. But I would like to remind you, in the lead up to the last election, remember there was quite a fractious relationship between Clive Parmer and Scott Morrison. So Clive Parmer called Scott Morrison Hitler. Scott Morrison tried to refer Clive Parmer to ASIC. So I think they will be very tricky preference negotiations to undertake.
That could be true. But does this perhaps, his vote, if Newspoll hasn't exaggerated, and I think there's some question about whether he does really get 5% in a Melbourne seat here, I can't believe that, but let's say it's right. Does this indicate not so much popularity of Clive Parmer, but a dissatisfaction with both major parties?
Andrew, I think there always is a proportion of the community that's looking for an alternative to the major parties, and we can argue about whether that's at a higher level at the moment, historically, or a lower level. But I really hope those people who are contemplating voting for Clive or any other minor party at this election ask themselves, when they last voted for an independent, did they get what they voted for? Because if they voted for Clive previously, they ended up getting the Glenn Lazarus party and the Jackie Lambie party, not the Clive Parmer party. When they voted for Pauline previously, she lost 4 senators out of the 4 she had elected. I mean, these are not stable choices for people who want to ensure they're going to be represented according to what the promises are made at the election.
I think that's right. Kimberley, I've only got 30 seconds left. What does Clive Parmer actually want, do you think? What is he there to achieve?
Well, I wonder if it has to do with some of his business interests. And, if he is a player in the Australian political process, does that make some of the business dealings he has with people, with entities from other countries, does it make him appear more relevant?
And threatening, scary. Actually, I've just been told I've got another 30 seconds. James, policy-wise, what does he want? What ideologically? I mean, I've seen the ads, not that I believe half of it.
It's not really clear, Andrew, and that's often the case with these political parties, which are, in a sense, vanity projects that are named after individuals, and it's one of the reasons why they're so unstable. For all the criticisms, valid and otherwise, of major parties, we at least have philosophies that unite us more or less. These minor parties don't have a philosophy to hang around.
Well, as a small business and anti-global warming. Last time he was for global warming policies. And anyway, there you go. James Paterson, Kimberley Kitching, thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.
More after the break.